Welcome guys to our YIS Global Online Club today. Today we will be going over Unit 4, Lesson 1, and that is about coming up with investment ideas, getting ready for our stock pitch competition coming up soon. I have Saurabh today. Saurabh is one of our student advisory board members. He's going to be your instructor today. We also have a guest speaker, Sohail Chatur. He's coming today. He's the CEO and founder of Lively Wealth, and he's going to be giving a speech today about how to pitch anything. And so I think you guys can use some tips and tricks for your stock pitch competition. So that should be fun a little bit later on today. So Saurabh, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead.
Yeah. So first, obviously, I'm gonna start off with an idea of the week, unless we're pressed for time. But sure. So my idea of the week, at least that the event that happened, is the United Kingdom. At least their version of the FDA approved Pfizer's new COVID vaccine, and I mean, obviously they'll start deploying it soon. So I guess I can give my idea as to how that'll impact the stock. I think that's pretty clear cut here. But does anyone want to chime in as to how that'll affect the markets, whether it's the healthcare sector or the markets more broadly? You can type it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and talk. No? Okay, so obviously my take is that would be that obviously Pfizer stock's going to go through the roof, and this is definitely going to be at least kind of foreshadow likely the U.S. approving the Pfizer vaccine and deploying it if at least if the U.S.'s standards are anywhere close or at least somewhat like the UK standards. And I think this is definitely going to this may negatively affect obviously other competitors like Moderna and their vaccines. So that's basically the idea of the weekend. What's been going on in the markets recently. So now I'll start sharing my screen. Okay, so does everyone see this presentation, this Prezi? What says Young Investors Society? Perfect. Okay, so by the way, let me introduce myself. I'm Saurabh. I'm a senior from Virginia. I'm the secretary of the Student Advisory Board, and I've been at YIS for 3 years, and I got the CYI designation when I was my sophomore year. And I've competed in the stock pitch competition twice, and it's really been a great opportunity for me. And the YIS Global Club is a great avenue for me to give back. So today we're going to be doing Unit 4, and that's going to be in Lesson 1. That's going to be coming up with investment ideas. We're going to be concerned with idea generation today. So let's start with an overview. And this lesson is going to be building on the foundation of what stocks do invest in. So we're going to talk about what to look for and where to look for it. And that's those two, what to look for when it comes to picking a stock, and how to find those stocks and how to apply that criteria to finding good investments. That's basically what we're going to be looking at today. And let's look at our objectives. So we have two objectives. One is identify businesses that you know offer a competitive moat, and we're going to go over that later. And analyze and customize stock screens to evaluate a stock for investments, and we're going to start looking at stock screeners later. So yeah, so basically, before we start the whole lesson, so I want you all to at least type in the chat one product in which you spend money on constantly. It can be a good, it can be a service. So this is going to be an exercise as to, so just write one product in which you constantly spend money on. Okay. So do you have a specific like brand, or do you have a specific? Okay. So, all right. So okay. So now let's move on to the next exercise. So now make a list of 5 companies that you think would be a good investment. So at least for my thing that I consistently spend money on, like Amazon isn't necessarily a product, but it's definitely a marketplace. So, and that's definitely a service that I use. So I also want you to at least make a list of, you don't have to partner up, just make a list of 5 companies. It doesn't have to be up to 5. It doesn't have to be 5, but you can just make at least a couple. So at least list at least one company which you think is going to be a good investment in the future. You can type that in the chat as well. Okay. Okay, so does anyone unmute and give their idea or about what about a company that may be a good investment? Okay, so yeah, I mean, no, Tesla's not a bad idea. So Tesla could be a good investment, especially that it's added to the S&P 500. But so Apple's also a great idea. So I mean, the similarity between these two is that companies that are popular, companies that people constantly spend money on and consistently spend money on, typically can be good investments. And this takes us to a man named Peter Lynch. So Peter Lynch was the manager of the Fidelity Magellan Fund, which has consistently beat the S&P 500. And his classic quote was, "Invest in what you know." And a story is that his wife was actually shopping for, I don't remember the product's name, but it was a product that she rambled on and she raved about, that it was such a amazing product, and it was actually manufactured by Haynes. So Lynch went out and with this information that his wife loved the product, and she consistently bought it since she went to the grocery store constantly. And this was actually sold at the grocery store. He went out and he bought Haynes' stock, and he eventually made 30 times his investment. So 30 times, that's a massive return on investment. So, and this is basically one example of Peter Lynch basically using his personal experiences and his own knowledge to buy the stock. So and this is Peter Lynch basically thinking of, and his wife's supposed to be represented on the right, that his wife has been constantly shopping, and Peter Lynch is thinking of using this as an investment idea. So even though Peter Lynch's quote still is quite fair in that you should buy what you know, a popular company and a company that you always that you are very familiar with does not mean it's a great investment, because there are many different aspects to a good investment. So for example, if a company may be popular, but it may have terrible management. A company may be popular, but it may be super insolvent since it may have taken on a ton of debt. It may be popular, but it may be actually dying as it may be being like eclipsed by a technology. Like for example, Target may be really popular, but it's being eclipsed by Amazon to a certain extent. So these are just a couple examples. Netscape, Delta Airlines, Kodak, Sears. A lot of these companies are either totally gone, like Sears. Like Sears has filed for bankruptcy, or have significantly diminished. Like Delta Airlines has been overrun, at least in the domestic area, by cheaper flights like Southwest. Kodak, I don't think anyone uses Kodak cameras anymore. And Netscape, not many people or no one searches through the internet or surfs the internet through Netscape these days. But these are really popular companies back in the 2000s. However, that doesn't mean that they're great investments, since all of these companies declined. And here, this also pushes the point: a well-known business does not mean it is a good business. So here's obviously, I'm sure you know this guy's name, Warren Buffett. He added kind of a caveat to Peter Lynch's quote. He said that you should own simple, easy to understand businesses. So businesses that we know, businesses that we can understand. So that kind of is consistent with Peter Lynch's quote of buying what you know. But the caveat is that the businesses need a competitive moat around them, and from, if you were here 2 lessons ago, I believe, where I taught about economic moats. Economic moats are basically a competitive edge that a stock or a company has over its competitors and its peers in the industry that its industry peers just cannot diminish or cannot negate. So this is basically an edge that a unique edge that a company has. So these can be like intangible assets, like if a company owns a patent, like my stock that I pitched in the 2020 stock pitch competition had a unique patent, and that's an intangible asset that can be an economic moat. High switching costs, that's a barrier for going to a competitor's product, and that can obviously make that can make customers stick with your product. Network effects, companies like Facebook, their network. This is particularly important for the social media industry. Companies like Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, network effects are paramount, and that can be a real, an incredibly important economic moat and edge for those kinds of companies. And obviously, low costs, price advantages. It's a really simple advantage, but can also be really powerful when it comes to beating your competitors in industry. So I want you all to look at handout 4.1. So let's see. Let me see if I can put this in the chat. There we go. Does that link work for all of you? So this is basically the lesson plan right now. So does the link work for all of you? You can just nod your head, or you can just type in the chat. Okay, perfect. So now I'm going to go over basically the criteria for different types of companies you can look at. So obviously, people look for different things in stocks. People look for lots of things. Some people look for very few things. But three things you should look for is, does the company have a good business? Is the company good, in other words? And does the business have a future, of at least a prosperous future? And is the company growing? And lastly, is the stock cheap? And is the stock undervalued by the market? Does the market not see its potential as you do? So now, so obviously, and these are the criteria you can look at if you want to find a company that has a good business. So you want obviously a high return on equity, greater than 12%. You want the company to make lots of money on its products with high margins. You want it to be solvent, and that's interest coverage should be above 3 times. And obviously you want consistent earnings and return on investment throughout the years, at least the recent years, and that shows the company is very reliable as an investment. So that shows that it's at its core a good business. Another thing you can look for is the company growing? So, and that's obviously another very important part. You want a company that has a future, and the criteria here can be 5-year revenue growth, and that's 5-year revenue growth in the past, and that's on average should be greater than 4%. Same with earnings, that should be on average greater than 4% over the past 5 years. And you want forecasted growth in the next 5 years to be robust as well. And the last thing you should look for is the stock cheap, and is stock undervalued by the market? And the criteria for this can be a low PE ratio, lower than the market average. About 15 times is a good rule of thumb. It should pay a high dividend yield, and it should be above 3%, and a low price to book ratio, and that shows that it is that the price itself is undervalued compared to the book value is one of the ways that you can value a stock. So that shows that basically that the stock itself is undervalued should at least be undervalued or consistent with how much the company is worth, and that's the book value. So now that by the way, does anyone have any questions here? This is actually a good stopping point. Does anyone have any questions as to what I just said I know it was a lot. So, no? Okay. So now that I went over, what to look for, now I can show you like how to look for it. So one of the primary ways you can look for stocks very easily is a stock screen. And I'm sure you all know what a stock screen is. It's basically a way to filter out the characteristics you want in an investment. It's basically a very fast way to put in a couple of criteria and then instantly find good investments that you can at least look at more closely. And it's highly efficient. So And it's similar to, for example, picking out a car. So when you pick out a car, you look at different aspects of it: horsepower, gas mileage, color. Similarly, in an investment, you look at different aspects as well. And I just went over those aspects, like price to book ratio, 5-year growth in the past, forecasted growth, and stable earnings and ROI. These are just a variety of factors that you can look at when picking a stock, and it's similar to picking out a car. And a stock screen is just the perfect way to do this. And these are just 4 examples of very good stock screens that have worked, at least that YIS recommends. My favorite out of all of these is Zacks. I just like their interface. I think their interface works for me. But Google Stock Screen, Yahoo Finance, Uncle Stock, all these 4 are really good resources you can look at. So before we move on, I'll give a personal recommendation of mine. So in my stock pitch competition, I used a stock screen called finviz.com. So I'll just type that in. So that's in the chat right now. That's just the stock screen that I used that worked for me really well. It was, at least for me, it was better than all 4 of these. But I mean, I think you should just try them and experiment with them and see what works best. But that's just my recommendation as to what I used. But yeah, in general, stock screens can be really useful it's a really useful tool to search through universe of investments really efficiently. However, the stock screen isn't the end all, isn't like the end of your investment research process. Just because you find a stock on a stock screen, it doesn't mean it's good. You should obviously search into like its management and like its 10K. You should obviously do more thorough research as opposed to just plugging it into Google Finance and just picking a stock out of there. So I just want to make that clear. Now that I went through what to look for, right? You should look for a cheap stock with a good business and a good future, and you should look for stocks you're familiar with. So that's what you should look for. I showed you how to look for it with stock screens. Now I'm going to go over finally the different kinds of frameworks you can use for at least looking for investments. So one of them is the growth investor. So these investors look for stocks that are already doing really well. At least what it says here is 20% per year. That's really good for any firm. And you want stocks that, and if you're a growth investor, you want stocks that are making lots of money on their products and these are companies that have high gross margins. So these are basically these are basically investors that want to find stocks that are doing really well and they want to basically cash in on that investment, and because they see a bright future for that company since they're doing really well now. So that's one type of investor. The second type of investor is a deep value investor. So a deep value investor looks for stocks that are disliked heavily by the market, they look for stocks whose potential isn't recognized by at least the general marketplace. So they obviously look for really, really cheap companies. They have a really low price to earnings ratio and a really low price to book ratio. And their hope is when the market actually recognizes their potential, their hope is when the market recognizes their potential and actually goes into the stock, that cheap company will eventually appreciate massively in price, hence making the deep value investor a profit. Okay, so I'm not sure if we did the stock screen activity, but in general, I mean, there's no right answer, but you can just reflect for a couple of minutes in terms of, you can just reflect for like a minute or two in terms of what type of investor you are. It depends on your personality and what you look for. I would consider myself definitely more of a value investor. Like I like to look for those dislocations between and what the market thinks and what my own research comes up with. So that's at least what my personality is. So, but some of you may be like that, some of you may not, and that's perfectly okay. But in general, at least have what I would ask you to do, no matter what type of investor you are, is at least is look for stocks with robust businesses that have good growth prospects, and use at least the correct tools to look through it. A stock screener can be one of them, and at least do very thorough research. No matter what kind of investor you are, those things are going to be supremely important when it comes to picking any kind of it. And these are just some additional resources. Investopedia was really useful to me. obviously YIS was seeking alpha. You can find lots of stock research reports. But yeah, this is basically, thank you so much for coming. This is my presentation about on Unit 4 Lesson 1 on how to generate investment ideas. So
perfect. Thank you so much, Saral. I'm actually going to skip the video
Yeah.
because James was just going over the Prezi, and you did a wonderful job of going over the Prezi yourself. So thank you so much. Felt that that was a great presentation. Does anyone have any questions before we move on? Excellent. So without further ado, I introduce Sohail. Sohail is the CEO and founder of Lively Wealth. And he's going to be leading our discussion today on how to pitch just about anything.
Thanks, Christine. First off, Sora, nice job. Congrats. That was a super impressive presentation. I was like messaging Christine in the chat privately, just being like, damn, I wish I knew as much as he did when I was in high school. So great job. Let me pull up my presentation real quick. Where is it? So today I'm going to be talking to you guys about how to pitch anything so folks will beg you to take their money. The reason I picked this topic is largely because I joined YIS probably at the beginning of the year. I went through a bunch of the stock pitch competitions and I learned something. Everyone who does those competitions puts a lot of effort into their research, their reports, their analysis. It's all really impressive. But something that you'll learn, especially in the world of finance, is that research is boring. And you want to make it as exciting and as interesting as possible, because at the end of the day, what really gets people to invest is having themselves feel excited about the stock, about the company, about whatever they're investing in, whatever the opportunity is. So we're just going to go through a little bit of an agenda and we'll talk through this. So the agenda, I'm going to give you a quick intro about me, what I do, why I'm qualified to talk about this. We're going to talk about why everything is sales, why sales matter. I'm going to give you an example, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about sales and how sales impacts your pitch and your success when you're doing these types of competitions and just generally in life. So a little bit about me. I've been in sales since I was 15 years old. So my first job in high school, I went door to door with this lawn care machine called an aerator, where you basically use it to like poke holes in people's grass in order to theoretically make the grass grow thicker and greener. At least that's what they told me when they handed me the machine and said, go knock on people's doors for the next 14 hours. So that was my first job, and I've been in sales pretty much ever since. I started my first business at 19, and now I am a copywriter. And a copywriter is basically taking all of the aspects of one-on-one sales and putting it in multimedia form to go out to thousands, potentially millions of people at the same time. So instead of a typical sales conversation where you're talking one-to-one, what I do is I write these videos and direct these large video campaigns that are seen by sometimes millions of people who then buy directly from watching that video without having to actually speak to a person. So I'd like to say I'm a little bit qualified to talk about sales, and that's kind of what I do now at both my own company, Lively Wealth, and at Money Map Press, the company I work for right now. So here's the deal. Everything in life is sales, and I'm going to go brief on this, but basically, whether you're in a job interview, college application, in your dating life, convincing someone to go out with you, convincing someone to give you a job, convincing a college to accept you over anyone else, that's all sales. Because at the end of the day, whether it's a college essay, whether it's a frank conversation with your parents about wanting, what do people in high school want now? I don't remember. I don't know, going out later, going to parties, whatever it is. All of it is sales. You always have to give people a reason why they should choose you over anyone else, why they should say yes to you versus saying no. So everything in life is sales, and that sounds really cheesy, but it's true. Okay, so that's the external side. The internal side is with yourself. Even internally, everything you do is sales, because we've all had those moments of procrastination where you decide, you should be studying, you should be exercising, you should be paying attention in class, but you'd rather be watching TV or TikTok or texting or eating garbage instead of eating healthy. That's because you haven't sold yourself on why you should do the right thing, why you should do that good thing. So that's also an aspect of sales. And the only reason I'm telling you all this is to give you kind of the mindset of how important this is in all aspects of our everyday life. So why does this matter, especially for this particular context? Sales are the lifeblood of any business, and that's something you're going to have to realize whether you're looking at companies. So from an internal perspective, when you're analyzing a company to pick, you have to make sure their sales are strong, because at the end of the day, profits are, what makes the company run, but increasing revenues, increasing sales tells you what type of path a company is on. And the reason this matters externally is, like I said earlier, research is inherently boring. Especially if you are in the finance world and you're looking at stock charts and PR press releases and diving through company after company on whatever they're doing, whatever reports they're releasing, it gets dull. And especially this goes into the case of what you guys are doing in your stock pitch competition, is you need to figure out a way to make the boring stuff about a company interesting. And we know this because Warren Buffett has famously said he invests in boring companies. And the reason he invests in boring companies is because they do stuff that makes money. But at the end of the day, when he has to tell his shareholders why he picked, I should know what he just invested in the last quarter, whatever, why he bought more Dairy Queen or why he decided to purchase Geico, he has to find a reason to make that interesting. And often the numbers aren't quite enough. So that's what really comes down to it. Because as someone who's managing over $100 billion in assets, you have to explain to people and give a good sales argument for why you're making these large institutional investments. So here's an example. This is called a MEM. It's a microelectromechanical system. It's basically a chip that you put inside an Internet of Things device to make it talk to other things. If I told you that's what it was, you'd be bored out of your mind, because that's not interesting. So here's a slightly more interesting way to take something boring, make it sound a little more interesting. A new chip inside pacemakers can potentially detect heart problems early. It's a little more intriguing, a little more interesting, still kind of boring. 3, one device to end all disease. We took a tiny chip that's kind of boring, that's just like a chip, like every other chip inside a computer, inside a device, and we found a way to make it interesting. And the reason I'm using this example is because my mentor used this headline in a marketing campaign that brought in over $8 million in sales. That's the power of making the boring interesting. So let's talk a little bit more about what sales is. At the end of the day, sales comes down to 3 things: energy, emotion, and relationships. When you're in a sales conversation, whether it's a pitch to a bunch of people in a Zoom room, whether it's a job interview, whether you're on stage at a conference trying to sell to hundreds of people, you need to have energy, because people will reflect whatever you give to them. And they'll reflect it back a lot harder. So if you give low energy, they're going to give you even less. If you give high energy, they're going to give you even more. Because at the end of the day, you need to be excited about what you're selling in order to get other people excited about it. If you're doing a stock pitch competition, or if you're selling one-on-one, if you're selling cars on a dealership floor, if you're not excited about the product you're selling, no one else is going to be too. This is especially true now in a virtual world where people have so much screen fatigue. They're tired of looking at screens. They're tired of staring at their computer all day and being on Zoom calls all day. Like, if you come in with low energy, people are already going to check out. They're not going to be listening to what you're saying. They're not going to be paying attention. They're not going to absorb anything. But if you bring excitement to the table, naturally people lean in. Naturally people want to hear what you have to say, because clearly if this person's excited about it, maybe they've got something interesting. And slowly, as your excitement builds and you can build on the proof of what you're selling is actually great, when you can make something that's boring interesting, people get more and more excited. And because they're in a group, that excitement compounds. And that's how you make sales. That's how you succeed. That's how you win the competition. At the end of the day, no matter what you're doing, everyone is human. So whether you're selling to a corporation, whether you're selling to a group, or whether you're doing a stock pitch competition, the judges are human. We also want to be excited when we are judging the competition. We want to get excited about an opportunity. Like, the numbers aren't going to be exciting, but your energy will bring up any presentation. Now, naturally, you're going to have good research for your competition, your pitch, but the research, everyone's got good research. Like, assume that when you're coming to the competition and you've got good research, so does everyone else. What's going to set you apart is being able to sell me your investing idea, your thesis on why this company is one I should put my own money into better than anyone else. And because most of the judges are adults who actually manage their own brokerage accounts, we might actually end up putting money in some of these stocks if we're convinced. I know I did. I was not interested in Costco until I watched the presentation last year. So it makes a big difference. Emotion is another thing. So at the end of the day, you really have to understand the person you're talking to. And this goes for, like, I had to learn this, I didn't actually learn this when I was doing one-on-one sales. I learned it when I started copywriting. And what it means is when you have an idea of who a customer is, especially when they're a monolith, when you're selling to hundreds, thousands, millions of people at the same time, you have to figure out, you really have to develop a lot of empathy to figure out what's going on in these people's heads, what they're feeling, what their problems are, what they want, what they need. And that goes doubly for when you're in a sales conversation one-on-one, because no one's going to buy from you if they don't think you have their best interests at heart. That's why it's also a relationship business. You need to be able to solve people's problems and convince them and show them that you have empathy for their situation and that your solution to their problem is the best solution they could have because you have their best interests at heart and wouldn't lead them in a different path. That's all that sales is convincing someone that your solution is the best one to solve their problem because you have their best interests at heart. Part of that comes from being excited, part of that comes from empathy, and part of that comes from building a relationship. And also, I have no way to conclude this, so that's kind of the end of this. Because frankly, I thought I would have gone a lot longer.
No worries, Sohail. I'm sure students have quite any questions. You can type them in the chat or you can unmute.
Yeah, go ahead and unmute if you guys want. I don't bite.
Doesn't look like the students have any questions, but I do, Sohail.
Okay.
So you were, I want to say you were one of our judges for our stock pitch competitions that we held either online or virtual through YouTube. And I just want to know what really stood out to you as far as like some of the stocks that the students picked. Were you more or less interested in, you know, what kind of stocks really captured your attention? What would you like to see in the future?
I mean, honestly, none of the stocks were, so there were two that caught my eye. One, because it just made me interested because it was a micro cap stock and everyone else was picking S&P stocks. So everyone else was picking things, well, I guess I can say Tesla now because it's part of the S&P, but like, everyone was picking like Tesla, you know, the Costco, Cat, Johnson & Johnson, like NVIDIA. These are all good companies. They're all in the S&P 500s. They're all safe bets. But when someone came up with a micro cap stock, my immediate thought was, okay, this is something that, I mean, to be fair, like I'm 26 and I have a pretty high risk tolerance. So that had me interested because there was growth potential. And that's just one example of picking like a good stock. But also what I saw in one of the presentations that really had me interested, and Christine, what was her name? She was the one who won not only Maryland, but she won the East Coast. The one who picked Costco. I forgot her name, and so did you. Damn it. Okay. Damn it. It was on the tip of my tongue too, and I forgot it. So anyway, the young, what?
Kavya?
That's it. Kavya. Thank God we have Christine. So Kavya was, again, she picked what I consider a boring stock. She picked Costco. But every part of her presentation anticipated what the questions were going through my head as she was doing it. So for example, she was talking about their in-store sales. My first question was, why hasn't Costco pivoted more into e-commerce, especially when we're in a pandemic and people don't want to be going outside? This is at the beginning when people were really scared to go outside. How come Costco doesn't have the infrastructure for e-commerce? That was the question in my head. As soon as she finished with talking about their in-store sales, she immediately started talking about their e-commerce and how it's been growing year over year for the last 5 years. That's what you call understanding your customer, because you're anticipating their objections, you're anticipating their questions, You're anticipating the biggest obstacles to them moving forward with your suggestion, and you're addressing it before they even have the chance to fully verbalize. And I literally had, like, as I was going through every stock pitch, I had a sheet of notes. And so I would write something down and then I would just like delete it because she'd address it. And then I would write the next thing down and I would just end up deleting it. So I had no notes for her because she just happened to be hitting all of the points. So that's an example of something that got me interested. That's only one aspect of sales. That's the aspect of knowing your customer. There's also the aspect of energy. And there was one, I do not remember her name. She picked Lululemon. Again, company I'm not interested in. Their PE ratio is sky high, and I don't think they can support it. But I gave her second place in that round because her energy was so on point. She was confident in her pick. She had everything. She had all of the reasons why I would want to invest. And she addressed things like the sky high PE ratio. She talked about how their pivot to e-commerce has gone. She talked about the fact that they made a huge transition right at the beginning of the pandemic, turning all of their retail locations into distribution centers so they could get product to their customers faster. And she was excited about the company. You could tell, like, that is her favorite store. That was a big part of it too. So you've got research. That's important because at the end of the day, no one's going to buy a crappy company. You've got something exciting and interesting. That was the microcap person. You've got knowing your customer. That was Kavya, understanding exactly what the judges will want to know. And you've got the Lululemon girl who just brought true excitement to the table. That's probably the best example. You're muted.
We have a question in the chat that wants to know, what are some tips for finding a good stock?
Are you talking about to pitch, or are you talking about just in general stock picking advice?
It's a good question.
I am not
to
a
pitch.
Okay,
Oh, pitch.
good, because I cannot answer the other one. That is against the law, especially since we're recording this. I think the best things for finding a good stock is to probably, first and foremost, find something that you're actually interested in, because it's very hard to get excited about something that doesn't immediately pique your interest unless you do like the job I do, which requires me to spend 3 months finding interesting things about a boring company. And frankly, that is not fun. Find something you're interested in. Your natural excitement will leach out for sure. A good way to find exciting things, if you don't want to go the straight up route of going to the S&P 500 and being like, oh, I recognize Apple, let me pick Apple. If you don't want to go that route and you want something out of the box, I would suggest going on Yahoo Finance every day. Saurabh mentioned Seeking Alpha and just looking at what they're talking about. The Motley Fool has a ton of free content where every day they post a different blog article about stocks. And there's not a ton of information in those, but it'll give you a couple tidbits of things that are slightly interesting. They usually have like a thing, like they'll just take any stock and they'll go, why stock XY, 5 good reasons to buy XYZ stock. And there's like, a lot of it's fluff, but there's always at least 1 or 2 good points inside those articles. And that'll give you a good start. And they're usually different and interesting articles, so you can go through those. You can probably set up some kind of, I'm trying to think, what kind of Google alerts you can set up. Probably for, like, besides Yahoo Finance, you can probably set something up for Bloomberg. Any news out of the S&P is a good one. The problem with like what I would typically say is like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal is they're more news based right now, so you're not going to get a lot of stuff out of them. And then it just looks at your interests. Like if you're more interested in biotech, find like you can just set up an alert for biotech and it'll start sending you stuff. Especially right now, you're going to get a ton of stuff from AstraZeneca, Pfizer, BioNTech, Moderna, all of that. So that's a good way to pick those stocks to pitch. So if you want like an interesting stock that's outside the box but matches one of your interests, probably just like do an interest alert.
Can I suggest another source? Yeah.
Please, go for it.
So, and I mentioned Seeking Alpha. Another place is the Value Investors Club. That's a place that I've looked at. It's just really like just robust and full-fledged investment ideas. I can link it in the chat.
Nice.
So
I feel like the Motley Fool podcasts tend to have a lot more information than their articles. So if you want to listen to a bunch of analysts talk about stocks, that is a good place. They do make it somewhat exciting. So it also gives you kind of an understanding of how to talk about boring stocks in an exciting way. I'd give that a shot. Business Casual, the podcast from Morning Brew, tends to talk about some of that, but less so. They tend to be a bit more big picture. So if you want to just hear about stock stuff, the Motley Fool podcasts are good for that too. Jessica, it looks like you had a question, or rather a comment. For the stock pitch, I always work on the presentation / video itself in the last few days, whereas you show how, oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, honestly, like I said, if you have bad research, it's gonna show and that will ding you. But I would make the assumption that everyone has good research and your presentation is what's gonna set you apart. Like research is table stakes, presentation is what gets you your first place.
Yeah, I would have to agree. Presentation is great. We really like to see slides that are bullet points, and then you talk additionally about the bullet points so that we're not reading slides.
Oh, that's a great point. Especially, yeah. Oh, even worse, if you're reading the slides.
Yeah,
don't do that. We've had a few of those.
Don't read slides to us. You can put the bullet points down and then talk about each bullet point instead of actually like typing it out on your slides.
Yeah, I'll point out something else in that not everything about a company that the company makes sound good is good. And a good example of this was someone picked let's just call them an evil pharmaceutical company that happened to have an evil monopolistic farming division, or sorry, agritech division. And everything she said, it was very interesting. You could tell that she had found press releases from the company and was repeating those in her presentation as though they were a good thing. And the entire time, all of the judges were like, why? Because they were all just like, oh, no, you can't take money from poor countries and give it to your shareholders. Like, that's not a good thing. So that goes back to like one, knowing your audience, and two, doing your research. Like, that's just a side note. The good news is she seemed excited about it, but bad research doesn't compensate for a good presentation.
Excellent. Well, if no one else had any questions, I think that concludes our club meeting for today. So Hale, thank you so much. It was wonderful to have you.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I will see everyone next week, same time, same place on Zoom. Have a great rest of your week, you guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye, thank you.